Marcus Johnson arrived at Riverside Supermarket at 7:30 a.m., just like he did every Tuesday. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows as he put on his blue assistant manager vest and clipped his name tag to the pocket. Today marked his third year working at the store, and he took pride in knowing almost every regular customer by name. Morning inventory check, then we need to set up the new display, his manager Richard Cooper said without looking up from his clipboard. Marcus nodded and headed to the storage room. By 10 a.m., the store was busy with the usual morning shoppers. Marcus walked through the aisles, checking that everything was in order. In aisle 7, he noticed an elderly man with a walker struggling to reach a box of cereal on the top shelf. The man stretched his arm up, his fingers barely grazing the box, while trying to keep his balance with the walker. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Let me help you with that, sir," he said, walking over. The elderly man turned, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, young man. These old bones don't stretch like they used to." Marcus easily reached the cereal box and handed it to him. "No problem at all. Is there anything else you need help with today?" The man, who introduced himself as Howard Williams, smiled warmly. "Actually, I have quite a list. My daughter usually helps me shop, but she's home with a sick child today." Without thinking twice, Marcus said, "I'd be happy to help you find everything you need." Howard pulled out a crumpled list from his pocket. Marcus noticed his hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The list was long, items written in shaky handwriting. For the next 25 minutes, Marcus guided Howard through the store, reaching high items, bending down for things on lower shelves, and explaining which brands were on sale. They talked as they shopped, and Marcus learned that Howard was a retired teacher who had taught math at the local high school for over 40 years. "I probably taught half this town how to solve for X," Howard joked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. From across the store, Marcus spotted Richard watching them with a frown. He knew he should get back to his duties, but Howard still needed help. Marcus decided the inventory check could wait. When they finished shopping, Howard's cart was full. "Let me help you to your car," Marcus offered, noticing how tired Howard looked. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus loaded the groceries into Howard's trunk. The sun was warm on his back as he carefully arranged the bags so nothing would spill. "You know, not many people would take the time you did," Howard said, reaching for his wallet. "Let me give you something for your trouble." Marcus gently refused. "No need for that, sir. Just doing my job." Howard put his wallet away, but pulled out his phone instead. "Then at least let me take a picture with you. My daughter won't believe such good service still exists." They posed together, Howard's arm around Marcus's shoulders. After taking the photo, Howard thanked him again. "You've made an old man's day much easier. I'll be sure to ask for you next time I shop." Marcus watched as Howard slowly drove away, feeling good about helping someone who needed it. As he turned to head back inside, he saw Richard standing in the doorway, arms crossed and face stern. A chill ran down Marcus's spine despite the warm day. He knew that look. It meant trouble. But even as he walked back toward what would surely be a lecture, Marcus didn't regret his decision. Some things were more important than store policy, and helping someone in need was definitely one of them. The moment Marcus stepped back into Riverside Supermarket, Richard Cooper motioned him to follow. Marcus felt the eyes of his coworkers on his back as they walked to the small office at the rear of the store. "Close the door," Richard said, his voice flat. He sat behind his desk and pointed to the chair across from him. "Do you know how long you were away from your duties?" Marcus checked his watch. "About 30 minutes, sir. I was helping an elderly customer who—" 28 minutes, Richard cut in. "I timed it. 28 minutes when you should have been finishing inventory and setting up the new display." He tapped his pen against a form on his desk. "I'm sorry about that, but Mr. Williams needed help. He couldn't reach items or push his cart easily," Marcus explained. Richard's face remained hard. "We have store assistants for that. You're an assistant manager, Johnson. Your job is to make sure this store runs smoothly, not to play personal shopper." "With all due respect, sir, helping customers is part of running the store smoothly," Marcus said. He felt his heart beating faster but kept his voice calm. Richard slid the form across the desk. "This is a formal warning for neglect of duties. You left your assigned tasks without approval and spent almost half an hour with a single customer." Marcus stared at the paper, not reaching for it. You're giving me a warning for helping someone who needed it. I'm giving you a warning for abandoning your post without authorization, Richard said. Sign it. With a heavy feeling in his stomach, Marcus signed the form. As he stood to leave, Richard added, "And Johnson, next time, call a floor assistant. That's what they're paid for." For the next few days, Marcus felt Richard watching his every move. He worked hard, finishing inventory early and setting up 2 new displays, but he couldn't stop thinking about Howard Williams and wondering if he'd come back to the store. On Friday morning, Marcus spotted Howard again, slowly making his way through the automatic doors with his walker. The old man's face lit up when he saw Marcus. "There's my helper," Howard called out, waving. Marcus smiled and walked over. "Good to see you again, Mr. Williams. How are you today?" "Better now that I've found you. My daughter's still home with that sick child. Think you could spare a few minutes to help an old man again?" Marcus looked around. The store was quiet, and he had just finished restocking the cereal aisle. He saw no floor assistants nearby. Howard stood there waiting, hope in his eyes. Of course, Marcus decided. Happy to help. They spent 20 minutes shopping together. Howard told Marcus about his grandchildren and asked about Marcus's family. Marcus helped him reach items and carry his basket. When they finished, he again walked Howard to his car and loaded the groceries for him. "Same time next week?" Howard asked with a wink. "I'll be here," Marcus promised. But when Marcus returned to the store, Richard was waiting just inside the doors, arms crossed and face dark with anger. "My office. Now," was all he said. This time, Richard wasn't alone. A woman from the corporate HR department sat in the corner, her face showing no emotion. "This is your second offense in 1 week," Richard said, sliding a new form across the desk. "We have it all on security footage. Again, you abandoned your duties to spend time with a single customer." "Mr. Williams needed help," Marcus said. "He's elderly and disabled." "And I told you to call a floor assistant," Richard snapped. This shows a pattern of insubordination and disregard for store policies. The HR woman spoke up. "Mr. Johnson, Riverside Supermarket has clear protocols for helping customers with special needs. By not following them, you've created a liability issue." Marcus looked from one face to the other, understanding what was happening. "You're firing me for helping someone?" Richard pushed the termination paper forward. "For repeated policy violations after a formal warning. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." As Marcus cleaned out his locker, he wondered how helping someone in need could cost him his job of 3 years. He had no idea that this was just the beginning of a story that would soon shock everyone. Howard Williams sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through photos on his phone while sipping his morning coffee. He smiled when he came across the picture of himself with Marcus from their first meeting. His daughter Jenny walked in, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What's got you smiling, Dad?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "Just looking at a photo of that nice young man from Riverside Supermarket who helped me shop last week," Howard replied, showing her the picture. "I'm heading there this morning. Hope he's working today." 2 hours later, Howard returned home with a troubled expression. Jenny helped him with his groceries, noticing his unusual quietness. "Dad, everything okay?" she asked. Howard shook his head. "That young man, Marcus, he's been fired. Can you believe it? The manager told me he was let go for spending too much time helping customers like me instead of doing his real job." Jenny's eyes widened. "They fired him for helping you. That's ridiculous." "It's worse than ridiculous," Howard said, his voice rising with anger. "It's wrong. That boy was just being decent. He saw an old man struggling and stepped up." That evening, Howard couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, having marched for civil rights back in the 1960s. This injustice stirred something in him. "Jenny," he called out, "can you help me post something on that Facebook thing you set up for me?" Together, they crafted a post describing what happened, including the photo of Howard and Marcus. Howard ended it with, "I fought for equality 60 years ago, and I'll fight for it today. This young man lost his job for showing basic human kindness to an old man like me. Is this who we've become?" By morning, the post had been shared over 500 times. By lunchtime, it reached 5,000 shares. Local Facebook groups were buzzing with outrage, and someone had started a hashtag. Hashtag Justice for Marcus. The local newspaper called Howard for an interview, then a TV station. Soon, reporters were gathering outside Riverside Supermarket, asking shoppers for their opinions. "I've been coming to this store for 15 years, one woman told a camera crew. "I've seen Marcus help elderly people, mothers with babies, anyone who needed it. If that's against store policy, then their policy is wrong." People began leaving comments on Riverside's social media pages. "Shame on you for punishing kindness. My family won't shop at a store with these values." This is what happens when companies care more about rules than people. Marcus, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by the attention. He hadn't expected any of this when he gave Howard his phone number that final day at the store. "I was just doing what my mother taught me," he told a reporter who tracked him down. "She always said to help those who need it. I'd do it again, job or no job." By the end of the week, a local church organized a community meeting about the incident. More than 200 people attended, including Marcus and Howard. When they entered together, the crowd gave them a standing ovation. Pastor Williams, no relation to Howard, addressed the gathering. "When we see someone punished for an act of kindness, we must ask what kind of community we want to be." Local business owners approached Marcus after the meeting, offering him jobs. 3 different lawyers handed him their cards, suggesting he had grounds for a wrongful termination suit. Outside Riverside Supermarket, a small but growing group of protesters appeared each day, carrying signs with slogans like "Kindness is not a crime" and "Boycott Riverside." The store's parking lot, usually full, was now half empty. The regional manager of Riverside's parent company flew in to assess the situation. As she drove past the protesters, she frowned at a large banner stretched between 2 cars. "Fired FORTCRing. Is this your company policy?" She knew the corporate offices were already receiving hundreds of angry emails and calls. What had started as a simple termination was quickly becoming a public relations nightmare. Something would have to be done, and soon. The meeting room at Riverside Supermarket's regional headquarters buzzed with tension. 6 executives sat around a polished table, watching a video of protesters outside their local store. "This is getting out of hand," said Barbara Fletcher, the regional director. She clicked to the next slide showing plummeting sales figures. "Store number 147 is down 43% this week. Our social media accounts are flooded with angry comments." "It's just one store," argued Tim Nash from marketing. "This will blow over." Barbara shook her head. "It's spreading. 3 other locations have reported protesters. #Justice for Marcus is trending in our entire operating region." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sandra Wells, the head of corporate communications, entered with a stack of printouts. "The latest news coverage," she said, distributing them. 2 national news networks picked up the story this morning. They're framing it as "Heartless Corporation Punishes Employee for Helping Disabled Veteran." "Williams is a veteran?" Barbara asked, alarmed. "Served in Vietnam. Came up in this morning's background check," Sandra confirmed. "We need to release a statement immediately." Within an hour, Riverside's parent company, National Grocers Incorporated, posted a carefully worded statement on all their platforms. National Grocers Incorporated is aware of the situation regarding a former employee at our Riverside location. While we cannot discuss specific personnel matters, we want to assure our customers that the termination resulted from multiple policy violations, not a single incident of customer assistance. We value both our customers and our strict procedures that ensure consistent service across all locations. The statement only made things worse. "They're doubling down," Howard exclaimed, reading the statement on Jenny's tablet. "Not even an apology." Jenny was already typing a response to post online. "My father is the customer they claim to value so much. If they truly cared, they would reinstate Marcus and apologize to him." Meanwhile, at his small apartment, Marcus stared at his phone as it buzzed continuously with messages of support. A reporter had just texted asking for comment on National Grocer's statement. "I don't want to make trouble," he told his mother over the phone. "I just want to find a new job." "Baby, sometimes trouble finds you for a reason," she replied. "This isn't just about your job anymore." That evening, the local news featured interviews with 3 Riverside employees who had quit in protest over Marcus's firing. "I've worked there 4 years, And I've seen white employees take longer breaks, spend time chatting with customers, and never get written up, much less fired, said Tanya Rodriguez, a former cashier. But Marcus helps an elderly disabled vet and gets terminated. I couldn't stay there after seeing that. By morning, hashtag boycott national grocers was trending nationwide. Celebrity chef Antonio Martinez, known for his popular cooking show, tweeted, "Won't be shopping at any national grocers stores until they make this right. Kindness should be rewarded, not punished." The company's stock dropped 3 points by market close. Inside Riverside Supermarket, Richard Cooper watched his nearly empty store with growing anxiety. His phone rang, the regional director again. "Cooper, what exactly happened with this Johnson situation?" Barbara demanded. "We need details now." "It was a clear policy violation," Richard insisted. He abandoned his post twice. "And was race a factor in your decision?" she asked bluntly. "Of course not." Richard snapped, perhaps too quickly. "I would have fired anyone who did the same thing." "Well, someone named Lisa Chen from your store just went on social media claiming she spent 45 minutes helping a customer plan a birthday party last month, and you praised her for it. Care to explain the difference?" Richard fell silent. National Grocer's crisis management team worked through the night drafting a new statement. Sales were dropping at stores across the country. Something had to be done. The next morning, customers arrived at Riverside Supermarket to find the doors locked and a sign posted, "Temporarily closed for staff training and policy review." Inside corporate headquarters, executives debated their next move, unaware that the worst revelations were yet to come. Jamal Washington had worked at Riverside Supermarket for 5 years before quitting 6 months ago. He sat in his living room watching the news coverage about Marcus, a strange mixture of anger and validation washing over him. "I knew this would come out eventually," he muttered to himself. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Channel 7 News. "Mr. Washington, this is Rebecca Chen from Channel 7. We understand you used to work at Riverside Supermarket under Richard Cooper. Would you be willing to share your experience?" Jamal hesitated only briefly. "Yes, it's time people knew the truth." 2 hours later, Jamal sat under bright studio lights, nervously adjusting his collar as the camera operators prepared for the interview. "We're speaking with former Riverside employee Jamal Washington, who claims Marcus Johnson's firing is part of a larger pattern," Rebecca began. "Mr. Washington, you worked under Richard Cooper for several years. What can you tell us about his management style?" Jamal took a deep breath. "Richard has different rules for different employees, and those differences often fall along racial lines. Black employees were watched more closely, criticized more harshly, and punished more severely. Those are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support this?" Rebecca asked. Jamal nodded and pulled out his phone. "I kept emails and texts. I knew someday I might need them." The first email he showed was from Richard to the management team. "Johnson is too visible on the floor. Customers are starting to ask for him specifically. Remind him his job is management, not customer service." Another text from Richard to Jamal read, "Need you to document every time Johnson is away from assigned duties. Looking for pattern of behavior." The most damning evidence came next. Jamal displayed a series of performance reviews showing black employees consistently scored lower than white employees in adherence to policy categories, despite similar or better overall performance. "This doesn't look like coincidence," Rebecca observed. "It's not," Jamal confirmed. "Richard once told me that certain employees needed to learn their place in the organization. When I asked which employees, he just gave me this look and said, 'You know who I mean.'" By evening, the interview was the lead story on multiple news channels. Hashtag Riverside began trending alongside hashtag Justice for Marcus. Marcus watched the coverage from Howard's living room, where Howard and Jenny had invited him for dinner. The three had become something of a team over the past week. "I never wanted to believe it was about race," Marcus said quietly. "I kept thinking it was just about rules or Richard having a bad day." Howard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, sometimes it's easier to believe it's not about race, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away." Meanwhile, in a downtown law office, attorney Eliza Hernandez reviewed the mounting evidence. She had offered to represent Marcus pro bono after hearing about his case. and now her phone was ringing constantly with former Riverside employees wanting to share their stories. "We have enough for a solid discrimination case," she told her paralegal, "but I want to file a class action if possible. These patterns suggest this goes beyond just Marcus." At National Grocers headquarters, executives were in crisis mode. Their internal investigation had uncovered Richard's troubling email history, including messages to other managers about keeping certain employees in check, and comments about Marcus being too popular with customers. "We have a serious problem," Barbara told the CEO during an emergency call. "Cooper's emails contain language that could definitely be interpreted as racially motivated. If this goes to court, we're looking at substantial damages." "Fire Cooper immediately," the CEO ordered. "And get our legal team to reach out to Johnson. We need to settle this before it gets worse." But for Richard Cooper, things were already getting worse. As he drove home that evening, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. "We have the recording from last year's Christmas party, the one where you talked about your diversity problem. Dropping tomorrow." Richard's hands shook as he pulled to the side of the road. He remembered that conversation all too well and knew it would be the final nail in his coffin. The law offices of Hernandez and Associates buzzed with activity. In the main conference room, Marcus sat beside Eliza Hernandez, watching as she organized documents into neat piles. "So I really have a case?" Marcus asked, still not quite believing all that had happened in the past 2 weeks. "You have more than a case," Eliza replied, tapping a thick folder. "You have what might be one of the strongest workplace discrimination cases I've seen in years." She laid out 3 photographs showing different employees helping customers. These were all taken from store security footage. "This is Lisa Chen spending 40 minutes helping a customer plan a party. This is David Miller, who regularly helped elderly shoppers for extended periods. Neither was ever disciplined." Marcus studied the photos, and they're both white. "Exactly," Eliza nodded. "Different rules for different employees based on race. Classic discrimination pattern." A knock at the door interrupted them. Eliza's assistant entered with a young black woman. "This is Tamika Roberts. She worked at Riverside for 2 years under Richard Cooper." Tamika nervously took a seat. "I was fired last year for excessive breaks after I spent time helping a customer find a specialty item. When I pointed out that white employees took longer breaks, Richard said I needed to be twice as good to get the same treatment." By afternoon, 2 more former employees had shared similar stories. Each account strengthened the case, painting a clear picture of systematic discrimination at Riverside Supermarket. The following Monday, Eliza filed the official lawsuit. Johnson v. National Grocers Incorporated. The court document outlined claims of racial discrimination, wrongful termination, and hostile work environment. News of the lawsuit spread quickly. National Grocers' stock dropped another 5 points. Their public relations team worked overtime trying to control the damage, but the evidence kept mounting against them. 3 days after filing, Eliza received a call from National Grocers' legal department requesting a meeting. She brought Marcus with her to their downtown offices. "Mr. Johnson," began Thomas Wilson, National Grocers' lead attorney, "we want to express our deepest regrets about this situation. The company has conducted a thorough investigation and found that your termination was unwarranted. We're prepared to offer immediate reinstatement, back pay, and a private settlement of $50,000, added Barbara Fletcher, now promoted to executive vice president after the previous VP was asked to resign over the scandal. Eliza smiled politely. "My client appreciates your offer, but we believe it falls significantly short given the evidence we gathered." She opened her laptop and played the newly discovered recording from the Christmas party, where Richard Cooper could be clearly heard complaining about having to hire too many minorities, and his strategies for finding reasons to get rid of the problematic ones. The room fell silent when the recording ended. "We're not just representing Marcus now," Eliza continued. 3 other former employees have joined our lawsuit, with more coming forward each day. We're seeking class action status." Barbara and Thomas exchanged worried glances. "What exactly are you looking for?" Thomas asked carefully. Eliza slid a document across the table. "This outlines our demands: substantial compensation for all affected employees, a complete overhaul of company hiring and disciplinary practices, mandatory diversity training, and a public acknowledgement of the discrimination that occurred." Marcus spoke up for the first time. This isn't just about money. It's about making sure no one else goes through what I did. As they left the meeting, reporters waited outside. Camera flashes lit up the street as Marcus stood tall beside Eliza. "Mr. Johnson, do you expect to win your case?" a reporter called out. Marcus looked directly into the cameras. "This isn't about winning or losing anymore. It's about right and wrong, and standing up when you see something wrong happening." The clip of his statement played on every major news channel that night. By morning, #StandWithMarcus had become the new rallying cry online, with millions of people sharing their own workplace discrimination stories. Inside National Grocers headquarters, executives gathered for an emergency meeting. The company's reputation was in free fall, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. They faced a choice: fight a very public legal battle they would likely lose, or admit wrongdoing and try to make amends. Howard Williams sat in his living room surrounded by a dozen people, each wearing shirts with #StandWithMarcus printed across the front. At 76 years old, Howard had become an unlikely organizer for what was now being called a movement. "Okay, folks, we got donations coming in from across the country," he announced, adjusting his reading glasses. "Jenny, how much have we raised so far?" Jenny looked up from her laptop. "Just over $23,000. That should help Marcus stay afloat while the lawsuit continues." The crowdfunding page they had set up 2 weeks ago had started small, mainly with contributions from local community members. But after Marcus's television appearance, donations flooded in from people touched by his story. "Mr. Williams, the local union representative is here," called a young volunteer from the doorway. Stanley Moss, who represented grocery workers across the state, entered with a thick folder under his arm. "We've collected statements from 17 current Riverside employees willing to testify about discriminatory practices. They're risking their jobs to support Marcus." Howard nodded appreciatively. Courage is contagious. Across town, Marcus sat in his apartment staring at his dwindling bank account. The lawsuit might eventually bring justice, but it wouldn't pay his rent next month. He had applied to several jobs, but once potential employers recognized his name from the news, interviews mysteriously fell through. His phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello, is this Marcus Johnson?" asked a woman's voice. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied cautiously. "This is Catherine Reynolds, Regional Director at Fresh Mart Grocers. I've been following your story, and I'm impressed by your commitment to customer service. Would you be interested in meeting to discuss a position with our company?" Marcus nearly dropped the phone. Fresh Mart was the biggest competitor to National Grocers in the region. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Fresh Mart's headquarters, nervous but hopeful. Catherine greeted him warmly and led him to a conference room where several executives waited. "Marcus, we've been watching how you've handled this difficult situation with grace and integrity," Catherine began. "Those are exactly the qualities we value at Fresh Mart. We'd like to offer you a management position," added Michael Chen, the company's operations director, "with a salary 20% higher than you were making at Riverside." Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Thank you. But why me? With all the publicity, wouldn't I be a risk?" Catherine smiled. "Sometimes doing the right thing is good business too. Your story has touched people because it shows what customer service should be about: actual service to customers who need help." Michael slid a folder across the table. "We're also launching a new company-wide initiative called Extra Mile that will train all employees on assisting customers with disabilities. We'd like you to help develop this program based on your experience." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He was being valued for the very thing that had cost him his previous job. News of Marcus's new position spread quickly. That evening, as Howard hosted another community meeting, Jenny burst in waving her phone. "You won't believe this. Fresh Mart just announced they've hired Marcus as part of their new disability assistance program." The room erupted in cheers. Howard wiped a tear from his eye. "Now that's what I call justice." The story took another turn when Fresh Mart's stock rose 7% following the announcement. Business analysts noted the positive public response to the company's decision to not only hire Marcus, but to create a program inspired by his actions. National Grocers executives watched with growing alarm as their competitor gained positive press and customer goodwill. Their own stores continued to lose business, with many loyal customers switching to Freshmart. "We need to settle this lawsuit immediately," Barbara urged during an emergency board meeting. "Every day this continues, we lose more customers and more money." The board chairman nodded grimly. "Make them a reasonable offer. Whatever it takes to put this behind us." That night, Marcus visited Howard to share his good news in person. As they sat on Howard's porch watching the sunset, Marcus shook his head in wonder. "3 weeks ago, I thought losing my job was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now it might be the best thing that ever happened." Howard patted his hand. "Sometimes life's worst moments lead to the greatest changes. This started with just you helping me reach a cereal box. Look what it's becoming now." Neither man could have predicted how much more was still to come. 6 months had passed since Marcus Johnson was fired from Riverside Supermarket, the crisp autumn air carried. "There he is," someone shouted. Cameras flashed as Marcus, dressed in a sharp navy suit, approached the microphone stand. Beside him stood Howard Williams, Eliza Hernandez, and 5 other former Riverside employees who had joined the lawsuit. "We have reached a settlement with National Grocers Incorporated," Eliza announced to the assembled reporters. "While the terms are confidential, we can say that justice has been served for Marcus and all those who suffered discrimination under Richard Cooper's management." Though the exact amount remained private, sources close to the case suggested the settlement was well into 7 figures. More importantly, National Grocers agreed to a complete overhaul of their hiring and disciplinary practices across all locations. Marcus stepped up to the microphone. This was never about money. It was about standing up for what's right. No one should lose their job for showing basic human kindness. After the press conference, Marcus returned to his office at Freshmart's regional headquarters. His new title, Director of Customer Experience, hung proudly on his door. In the 6 months since joining Freshmart, he had helped implement the Extra Mile program in over 50 stores, training employees on assisting customers with disabilities and special needs. "The quarterly numbers are in," Catherine said, poking her head into his office. "Stores with the Extra Mile program are showing a 12% increase in customer satisfaction and 8% higher sales than locations still waiting for implementation." Marcus smiled. Turns out doing the right thing is good business after all. That evening, Marcus drove to the community center where he and Howard now regularly spoke to local groups about workplace equality and disability awareness. Tonight's crowd was larger than usual. "I have a surprise for everyone," Howard announced as he opened the meeting. National Grocers has finally fired Richard Cooper and issued a public apology to all employees affected by discriminatory practices during his tenure. The room erupted in applause. The apology, printed in major newspapers and posted online, acknowledged the unacceptable discrimination that had occurred and outlined specific steps the company was taking to ensure it never happened again. "That's not all," Howard continued. "They pledged $1 million to create a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing business management degrees." After the meeting, Marcus checked his phone to find a message from an unexpected source. Barbara Fletcher from National Grocers. "I wanted you to know that I've been appointed to lead our new Office of Inclusion and Diversity," her message read. "Your courage changed our company for the better. Thank you." 1 year to the day after Marcus had first helped Howard reach that box of cereal, they stood together at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Williams Johnson Customer Care Training Center. Freshmart had built the facility to train employees from across the country in their now famous Extra Mile program. From fired to famous, Howard joked as they posed for photos. Marcus laughed. From unemployed to unstoppable. The center featured a wall of photographs showing the journey from that first day at Riverside to the nationwide movement it had sparked. Store policies across the country had been reviewed and revised. Other companies had taken notice, implementing their own programs to ensure employees were rewarded, not punished, for going above and beyond. As Marcus addressed the crowd at the opening ceremony, he spotted a familiar face in the back. Richard Cooper stood quietly watching, looking older and humbled by the year's events. When their eyes met, Richard gave a small, acknowledging nod before slipping out the door. Later that evening, Marcus sat with Howard on the older man's porch, sharing cookies and coffee as they had so many times over the past year. "Did you ever imagine all this would happen when you asked for help with that cereal box?" Marcus asked. Howard smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. No, but I've lived long enough to know that the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes. One act of kindness set off a chain reaction that changed thousands of lives. Marcus looked out at the sunset, thinking about all that had happened. He had lost a job but gained a purpose. He had faced injustice but helped create lasting change. Sometimes, Howard said softly, you have to go through the storm to see the rainbow. Marcus nodded, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought him here. What had started as one man helping another had become so much more, a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it costs you, can change the world in ways you never imagined.